Right now, somewhere in the Kalahari, a man is sitting across a fire from the woman who betrayed him. He doesn't have a lawyer. He doesn't have a judge. He doesn't have a divorce attorney billing him $400 an hour. He has the fire, the camp, and about 28 people who already know exactly what happened. That's it. That's the entire system. For 300,000 years, humans handled one of the most explosive forces in social life, cheating, without courts, without prisons, without any of the machinery we built to contain it. And the way they did it was so different from what we do now that most modern people can't even recognize it as a system at all. So what did they actually do? Let's start with what made it different. In a hunter-gatherer camp, there are no secrets, not real ones. You sleep within arm's reach of your neighbors. You eat together every night. You know the sound of everyone's breathing. You know whose mood shifted this morning and whose eyes have been tracking someone they shouldn't. Anthropologist Kim Hill, who spent decades living with the Ache people of Paraguay, described the camp as a place where privacy essentially does not exist. Not in the way we mean it. This changes everything about what cheating even is. In a modern city, an affair can stay hidden for years. Different schedules, separate phones, the anonymity of size. A couple can share a house and live entirely parallel lives. The discovery, when it comes, hits like a collision, sudden, total, catastrophic. Two people are ambushed by a version of reality they didn't know existed. In a hunter-gatherer camp, that kind of ambush almost never happened. By the time anything became a confrontation, the entire camp had been watching for weeks. This didn't make infidelity rare. It made it visible. The Hadza of northern Tanzania, one of the most studied hunter-gatherer groups still living today, have a rate of what anthropologists diplomatically call extra-pair relationships that is not dramatically lower than modern societies. Humans are humans. The impulses didn't change. What changed was the container those impulses lived inside. Anthropologist Frank Marlowe, who lived with the Hadza for years, noted that romantic conflict was one of the most common sources of camp tension. It came up constantly. In stories, in jokes, in the careful way people position themselves around the fire. The camp didn't pretend it didn't happen. The camp absorbed it, processed it, and dealt with it the way it dealt with everything, out loud. Together, the first tool was conversation. Not confrontation, conversation. The Bushmen of the Kalahari had a practice that anthropologists have documented across dozens of hunter-gatherer groups. When something went wrong socially, people talked about it. Not directly at first. Indirectly. Someone made a joke. Someone told a story about a cousin in another camp who had done something similar. The message traveled. The person it was aimed at understood. The camp understood. And pressure, slow and communal, and completely invisible to an outsider, began to build. Anthropologist Polly Wiesner, who spent years recording conversations among the Juhansi Bushmen, found that a significant portion of nighttime fireside talk was dedicated to exactly this kind of social maintenance. Naming things without naming them. Applying pressure without a single direct accusation. The camp was its own court. And the jury never stopped deliberating. If conversation didn't work, the next step was direct confrontation. And here is where it gets complicated. Because hunter-gatherer confrontation looked nothing like what we imagine. There were no lawyers presenting arguments. There was no appointed authority deciding who was right. What happened instead was a camp-wide negotiation, loud, emotional, and completely public, that didn't end until everyone reached something they could live with. Not necessarily justice, not necessarily fairness, something livable, something that kept the camp together, because that was always the real goal. Not punishment, not revenge. The camp in 1993, anthropologist Christopher Boom published research arguing that hunter-gatherer societies were deliberately, aggressively egalitarian, not accidentally equal, actively equal. If one person accumulated too much power, too much status, too much claim over others, the group moved against them. Gossip first, then open mockery, then social exclusion. The mechanisms they used for handling infidelity were the same mechanisms they used for handling everything that threatened the group's balance. They were not separate systems. They were one system, applied to different problems. This meant that a man who responded to a cheating partner with violence was not a wronged husband. He was a problem. A man who raged and dominated and punished was accumulating exactly the kind of power that made camps unstable. And camps dealt with unstable men the same way they dealt with everything else. They talked about him, they made jokes about him, they watched him, and if he didn't settle, options narrowed. The most extreme consequence in a hunter-gatherer camp was not prison. It was exile, being removed from the group, being left without the network that kept you fed, protected, and alive. Anthropologists who have studied ostracism across hunter-gatherer societies describe it as the functional equivalent of a death sentence, not immediate, but close. A person alone in the Kalahari does not last long. It was almost never used. It didn't need to be. The threat of it was enough. But there was another option, one that modern people underestimate entirely. Walking away. In a hunter-gatherer camp, you can pack everything you own in about 15 minutes. Your entire life fits in a single bag. If a relationship became unbearable, if a camp became unlivable, you left. You walked to the next camp, a few miles away, where cousins or old friends would take you in without ceremony. You stayed a few weeks. You let the heat pass. Then sometimes you came back, sometimes you didn't. Anthropologist Robert Kelly, who analyzed mobility patterns across hundreds of hunter-gatherer societies, found that camp composition shifted constantly. People moved. Alliances reformed. Relationships that couldn't survive a fixed address dissolved quietly when someone simply chose a different fire to sleep near. We don't talk about this enough. The mobility itself was a pressure valve. Conflict that would calcify in a fixed household, building and hardening over years, could instead be outpaced. You could literally walk away from it. And because everyone in the network knew you and had known you your whole life, walking away didn't mean starting over from zero. It meant temporarily relocating within a web of relationships that stretched across hundreds of square miles. This is radically different from what a divorce means today. Today, separation means legal proceedings, divided assets, contested custody, credit scores, lease agreements, the entire structural weight of a life built inside systems that don't let you simply walk away from anything. We made permanence the default. We made leaving expensive. We made conflict inescapable. Your ancestors didn't have that problem. They had a different one. They had to stay relationally alive inside a small group of people they could never fully escape either. The camp moved, but it moved together. The same 28 faces, night after night for a lifetime, there is a trade hidden inside that fact. The constant visibility that made secrets impossible also made recovery possible. When the camp watched you fall apart, the camp also watched you recover. There was no version of your failure that existed in isolation, filed somewhere permanently attached to your name. The same people who witnessed your worst moment were the people you hunted with the next morning, the people who handed you meat across the fire that night, the people whose children played with your children in the dust outside the camp. You could not curate yourself. But you also could not be permanently defined by your worst moment. That is something modern people spend a great deal of money and effort trying to recreate. Therapy, community, accountability groups, relationship counseling. We have built entire industries around the thing that a camp of 28 people provided automatically, whether anyone asked for it or not. We inherited their bodies, their nervous systems, their need for belonging and consequence and repair. The impulses that drive infidelity haven't changed in 300,000 years. Neither has the devastation it causes. Neither has the human need to process it inside a community rather than alone in front of a screen, watching the other person's social media, reconstructing their betrayal in private, with no fire, no camp, no cousin 3 miles away willing to take you in without asking too many questions. We built systems. We built laws and courts and contracts and therapists. Some of them work. Many of them help, but somewhere in the Kalahari tonight, a camp is working through something messy and human and devastating in the way it has always been worked through. Out loud, together, in the dark. Around a fire that everyone is responsible for keeping alive.